Hello. How are you?
And today we are talking about the great FloJo. I also have a interview that I did with one of my clients talking about her situation, and we're going to address that first. But first, let's talk about FloJo. FloJo died in, I believe, 1998 of an epileptic seizure, which was 10 years after she was considered the fastest woman alive. She ran and won and broke world records in the 100 and 200 meter sprints, and also got won in the Olympics, the relay race with the American team, I believe 4 years later. When she passed away, they could not find her will. That allowed her estate to stay in probate for more than 4 years, as her husband and her mother fought over what her intentions were. Mr. Thomas, we've been talking all month about the importance of a will, the importance of establishing the structure of your estate, whether you want a trust or who's going to get custody of your children. And today we address the issue of not having a will done, setting up a trust, but nobody knows where it is. How often have you seen that in your line of work?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I've seen it many times. In fact, the core of my legal practice is in business and corporate law, but I do wills because I think everyone should have a will. And I've seen it all when it comes to wills. I can vividly remember just 30 days ago, a guy that I see for coffee with a group 3 times a week suddenly dropped dead at the coffee shop. For a year before that, and probably on a bi-weekly basis, I would remind him and others about the need for a will. And you need a will to tell your story. And if you do not tell your story, the challenge is that others will tell your story for you. And the process of grieving varies from person to person. No two people grieve in the same way. And this is where these issues usually arise. People have different perspectives on what your story is based on maybe conversations you had with them, or based on what maybe they think you would have wanted to do.
Right.
You can solve all of that by telling your own story.
Absolutely. Taylor, I want to play the interview with Miss Simpson. We did an interview earlier today because she was unavailable during this hour. And about her situation. Then I want to comment on that, if you don't mind. Go right ahead, Taylor.
Okay, can we go back? Tell us when your father passed away.
My father passed away in November 2015.
Taylor, it's not playing.
You want me to go to commercial or something?
No, we're just gonna keep going. She's gonna bring it back up. So we'll wait for her to bring it back up in a second, Taylor.
I'm bringing it up now.
Okay. So as she was saying, her father passed away, and go ahead.
Father passed away in November 2015.
Okay, and then when he passed away, you said he collapsed in the Whole Foods parking lot?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he collapsed in Whole Foods.
And when that happened,
not in the parking lot, he collapsed in the store. And they took him to just a hospital, and then he passed away in the hospital.
Okay, and then you all found his car in the parking lot?
No, we couldn't find his car. We didn't know where it was. He was very into like physical exercise, so he ended up walking to the Whole Foods for, to grab a lunch. he was working on a property he owned nearby doing yard work and things like that. And so we ended up finding his car like maybe 2 blocks away from the property, parked on the street.
Oh, okay. 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 And then, you said he had a briefcase on him.
Yes, he kept his briefcase with him, and, you know, since we were children, we knew that that's where he kept his important papers, and so my brother and I, you know, looked into the briefcase and found a copy of the will. So we assumed that that was the most recent copy because he was carrying it around with him.
Okay, and so, you proceeded with his intentions based on the will that was in the briefcase, and you said you were cleaning up the storage.
Correct. So my father had 2 storage units, huge storage units that was full of furniture, and, you know, I was going through all of the papers in there, in the units, and found a more recent copy. I found a bunch of copies of his will, one from when he had divorced my mother back in, I think it was either 99 or 2000, and then I found a more recent copy, and it was maybe 4 or 5 years newer than the one that we found in his briefcase. And in the state of California, I don't think you're required to register your will when you update it. And so, you know, we had just assumed that the one he had was the most recent until I found a more recent one going through his papers.
And you said he was still in probate, and so you turned it over to the attorney, and what?
Correct, because my father there was a lot going on with my dad when he passed, and so we got an attorney that we could use that had, you know, kind of experience with bankruptcy and with, you know, wills and estate planning and all of that kind of stuff, so that we could kind of use him, because my father was in the middle of going through bankruptcy as well.
Okay. Was there real estate involved?
Yes, but there was real estate involved. My father owned income properties, and so
right.
You know, and we didn't know California law. We, you know, weren't aware of all of the details of what was going on with the lawsuit. His attorney for that lawsuit, because he was, it's a lot of stuff, but the attorney that he was using was not very forthcoming with us. He was fairly new and inexperienced, and he just he was not very helpful or useful. So we ended up getting our own attorney.
I understand, and probably because the dispensation of the will, he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be talking to anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You think that had something to do with it?
Well,
right.
I don't know. Like he was kind of a shifty guy anyway. Like we had the death certificate. He didn't want to, and we had some paperwork stating that we should be able to kind of get information from him. But I mean, like we found paperwork where he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do either. So I think, you know, I think there was a lot of different issues at play with my father's attorney.
Right.
And so we ended up getting our own attorney that specialized in some of the things that he was going through, and then also the estate piece. And even though he had a trust, we ended up having to go through probate because of the bankruptcy and because of the lawsuit that was.
Okay, so let me understand. There was a trust that was set up.
There was a trust that was set up.
So there was a trust that was set up. There was a will, but you found a more current one. What?
Correct.
How did that affect everything when you found the more current will?
Things had changed as far as what was included in the will versus what was part of the trust. And the attorney that we had, he was a really good attorney. He broke it down, explained it to us, and it ended up dragging on for a while because we had to go back to court many times, and somebody had to fly out to do that. So
Right. And then I understand also, you were telling my daughter that you thought he had life insurance, and apparently he had canceled the life policy.
yeah, we didn't know anything about that. The agent my father used was a friend of the family. We knew him and his wife and his children very well. They would come over for dinner, and we would go over there, and when we called him up when we first found out that he had passed, and asked about the insurance, because my father had also gotten us policies, and through him, he indicated that my father had canceled his policy. And so we didn't know anything about that because, since we found out, I think we found out when I was in college that my father had policies out on us, and he had transferred the responsibility of paying the premiums for these policies to us, and my brother took it over since he was out of college and working. And he was very, kept telling us and instilling us it's important to have insurance, it's important to have life insurance, to cover these things. So we just assumed, since our policies were still in effect, that his policy was in effect, and we had no idea that he had canceled it.
All right, Taylor, can you pause the interview? Okay, so let's go over everything that she's brought up, because she covered a lot. So we have a situation where there were multiple wills, and she ultimately found the more recent one. Then we have a situation where I believe it was one of his tenants that was suing him. Then we have a situation of bankruptcy and then no life insurance. It's like a perfect storm. But he had a trust set up with no way to fund it because he canceled the life insurance and there were no liquid assets. I don't even, where do we start, Mr. Thomas?
Well, that is a familiar story for people who have some assets and have learned during their lifetime that they should do something to protect it. They find out, usually through an attorney, what they need to do. They set it up, but then life happens and the structure that has to remain in place for that vehicle to last until they pass away falls apart, and situations come. I mean, if you have a trust set up, it's got to be funded by something. And if it's funded by life insurance, you can't stop paying for the life insurance or cancel the life insurance.
Well, on the life insurance part, I think what he did was he cashed out.
One way or the other.
Right, because he needed the money, but right.
Right, the death benefit, which was going to be used to fund the trust, you've destroyed that. And
Yeah.
we see that happen. We see that happen. Oftentimes I find people don't know the difference between term life insurance, whole life, and variable life insurance. And that's why you have to sit with an insurance agent where that's what they do, and they can tell you and explain how it works. There are life insurance policies that after a number of years they're paid for, and you don't have to keep paying them.
Right.
Term life policies, if you miss a payment, you're done. So the insurance professionals can speak to that, and that's why estate planning involves an insurance agent, a lawyer, and a financial representative.
Yeah.
Because trusts are finance vehicles. The legal part of setting up a trust is the documentation. The vehicle itself is a financial vehicle, so you need your CPA to be involved in that process. How it's going to be funded, that involves your insurance agent.
Right.
And oftentimes people, it's just too hard to figure out, so they do nothing. And that's why I say at the end of the day, just make a will, just tell a story of what you want to happen on the day you're no longer here.
Yeah. Now, if any of my listeners want to call in, I just want to put the number out there. You can call in, ask questions, make comments at 410-481-1010. You can also text us at 443-660-7131, and we will try to answer your questions. Let's deal with the other issue, though, the lawsuit.
Well, the lawsuit, you can be sued by anybody for anything, and people sue others, not always to win. Winning is not always the goal. It could be about the fight. It could be about exhausting your resources to make you quit or give in. But that being said, the good thing about having a trust is that it can isolate your assets from lawsuits, much like having a corporation of a certain type. It provides a shield against your assets being attacked by lawsuits for personal issues.
Right.
So, that came into play, and it sounds like, and I'm guessing here, that bankruptcy became the strategy to get around being sued successfully.
Right. I think so. Yeah. I think ultimately, as she will tell us at the rest of the interview, and we can upload the entire interview on the Facebook page later, guys. But as she would resolve at the end of the interview, she tells us that the person ended up dropping the lawsuit.
Yeah. And on the issue of wills itself, there's a statistic that says 67% of wills are lost. And so just having a will is not good enough. It's definitely better than having no will at all. But you should find someone you can trust. And when you can't find someone you can trust, then there's your attorney, and there is the Register of Wills, which is in every state, which is an option for you to register a copy of your will such that it can be found when you pass away. And there's no bickering about past versions of a will, which is quite common, that there be past versions, but all of that holds up the probate process, which can take some time and is a cumbersome task in and of itself.
Yes, because it takes hours to put together everything that has to come together to successfully and easily go through probate, when you could either be proactive up front and make it easy. We talked about in the rest of the interview how being caught up in the probate process interferes with what you need to grieve, because you get so caught up in the fight, you don't realize that it is your grief that's unnecessarily, sometimes, not all the time, but unnecessarily driving this fight that doesn't even have to be a fight, because at the end of the day, it's really about what the person wanted that passed away. And if in fact there are open conversations, we talked about this 2 episodes ago when we were talking about Aretha Franklin. If you just sit down and have a conversation and say, this is my will, I've outlined everything in here, this is what I want. And even though things change, people get older, things change. I talked to her about the life insurance, that it's possible he had all this life insurance when they were younger, and when they got older, his needs changed. I don't know necessarily. I know that one of the points of contention at the end of his life, where he was talking to people about not getting cremated or not having a burial because he was a veteran. He felt like he had earned the right for the VA to cover the cost of his burial.
Yeah.
And that's what they should do, but it wasn't in the will.
Well, right. So, and that's why wills, you should just try to tell your own story.
Right.
Now, I come from a large family, and so my mother, I would fight with her about a will. She's still living. The issue for my mother having 6 kids was that, her will might be based on how she felt today.
Mm-hmm.
And it was surely going to cause an uproar amongst her children if things were not equally split up 6 ways or even 5 ways because one of my sisters predeceased her.
Right.
But that leads a person to not want to share the details of their will with their loved ones. And so the issue becomes, what do you do in that situation where I don't want my kids to be fighting while I'm still alive, which is only going to make me mad, and I might cut somebody else out of the will and move the proceeds or whatever over here. And that is why with all of my clients, I maintain a signed and notarized copy of their wills.
Mm-hmm.
Half of my clients, they've requested that they be registered with the county.
Right.
Not all people register them with the county, but the issue is real about, I love these people, but I don't trust these people. And they're going to do what they want to do anyway. And I really don't want my wishes to be known until I'm gone, so I don't have to hear their mouth. That's the reality in the world dealing with families and the family dynamic. Now, as the executor of the will, they don't get to grieve because they got a job to do.
Exactly.
And sometimes the grieving process bleeds into the job they have to do, and they don't really understand what's happening, but they're in the middle of a fight because they're trying to get to the end point where they can grieve. Now, others in the family are grieving while you're working, and that sets up a dynamic for discord, oftentimes misunderstandings and relationship breaking. And so those are all issues to be considered. None of them are a good reason why you should not have a will.
No, none of them. Last week we talked about the trust, what to set up in the trust, what to put in the trust. And I'm assuming Miss Simmons, well, based on my conversation with her father set up the trust so that there could be an easy transition of the real estate, because he actually owned like 8 or 9 properties that were actively generating revenue because they had tenants in them. Yeah. What other things would be a good idea to put in a trust?
Well, trust is the equivalent of forming a corporation when you're not wanting to form a corporation. It protects your assets from the prying hands of the outside world. That's what it does. And there are revocable trusts and irrevocable trusts. The mechanics of a trust and how they're set up are something that you must go over with your financial advisor and your lawyer to understand the different types. But most families, most people aren't in the situation where they have 8 to 10 income producing properties and are looking for a strategy to protect that. A trust is one such strategy. A co-owner is another such strategy. Mm-hmm. And the issue here is, how do you keep someone from being able to sue you and affect your ownership of the property? And 2, how do you avoid the probate expenses and the taxes assessed with a transfer upon your death? And so those are strategy-based decisions, and you have to take them very carefully. Most of the clients that I deal with do not need to set up a trust, but they hear it and it sounds sophisticated and sexy, so they ask about it. The last client was maybe 30 days ago, and it's a husband and wife. They don't own property. They have a 17-year-old son, and so they were talking to me about a trust. And I said, well, not only do you not need a trust, but unless you die in the next 30 days, your son is not going to be a minor anymore. And so you need to be thinking about, if you have insurances, not saddling this young person with sudden wealth and expecting them to know what to do with it. And this is what a will does. It tells a story of exactly what you want to happen. Sometimes a trust is set up in those situations to carry it out when you don't trust that that person can carry it out themselves.
Right.
And I've set them up many different ways to pay out upon completion of certain things like a college degree, to pay a portion out monthly, or to set aside money to be spent for specific purposes. These are all things that can be accomplished in a will or a trust.
Okay. I was,
No, so while you're thinking, let me just mention one other thing that I wrote down.
okay.
I wanted to make sure I covered it. The issue often comes where to look for a will. Your loved one has died and you think it's in a briefcase, but it's in the storage unit. So the habits of a person are the first things you should think of. If they keep a briefcase in their car, that's a clue. If they have a file cabinet in their office, that's a clue. If they keep a safe, that's a clue. But if you run out of clues, you should definitely ask their attorney. And you can go through the things to find past contacts with an attorney, or maybe you know an attorney that they've dealt with. Attorneys usually keep copies of wills. Another place is the Register of Wills for the county where you live. To access that information, if the will was registered, you need the person's name, their date of birth, and their date of death. And so you can go to the Registers of Wills office, just call the county clerk's office, wherever you are, to find out where exactly that office is. You can look at their online history. If they have a computer that you can access and they got it, there are online will sites that you can go to. If you look at their history and go through their emails, if you can see evidence of their footprint on the web to see what they've touched. You can also look, oftentimes under the bed is a place where people keep important things. If they're in a nursing home, oftentimes if you go into a nursing home, they ask you if you have a will that they will keep on file, their file for you. And then also the probate court. If it's not with the Register of Wills, and it could be that someone else filed a probate on behalf of your loved one, which does happen, then there will be information there. Those are some good places to start and look for a will if you cannot find it.
Okay, we got a question that came in, but we're gonna take a station identification break, and then I'm gonna bring the question up when we come back. Okay, thank you, Jason.
WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM HD3 Baltimore, celebrating Radio 1's 42nd anniversary.
Our Radio 1 family, our employees, their family members, our listeners, our viewers, our extended family.
And serving the African American community for over 42 years.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
As the road you travel changes, so can your insurance needs. Talking with Farmers Insurance Agent Ramona Jones McClain can help you assess whether you're ready for the journey ahead. Call Farmers Agent Ramona Jones McClain today at 443-660-7131. That's Ramona Jones McClain at 443-660-7131.
We are farmers. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.
Underwritten by Farmers Truck Fire Insurance Exchanges and Affiliates. Products not available in every state.
Hello, DMV. This is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru. I am a farmer's agent located at 11707 Ricerstown Road in Ricerstown, Maryland. Here, you can call me at 443-660-7131 or listen to my show every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. on WOLB.
All right, you're back live in 3, 2, 1, whenever you're ready.
All right, DMV, this is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru, and we are back today again talking about wills and estates and the great Flojo, who died without a will, or at least it being able to be found, and the havoc that it can cause between family members, both blood and by marriage, if in fact your intentions are not made known. Our guest today, Mr. Attorney Derek Thomas, who was telling us about really what your will is telling your story, is putting a narrative in place that allows those who are still here to know what you intended to happen at your demise. Mr. Thomas, can you give our listeners your information so they can call you, reach you, email you?
Sure. I'm Attorney Derek Thomas. I'm Maryland, and a Maryland attorney. I'm usually easiest reached by email. That's Derek, DERRIC .Thomas, THOMAS @DT Corp Law. That's D as in Derek, T as in Thomas, corplaw.com. You can easily Google me or look in the Maryland Attorney database and find that same information.
Wonderful. So we had a question that came in via text. The question says, okay, I'm a U.S. citizen, but my mother, who passed away, is in Guatemala, and I inherited her house down there. How do I set that up so it is protected, even though I'm here in the United States?
Well, that's a good question. And my recommendation would be to contact a wills and estates or probate attorney in Guatemala, because that's outside of the U.S. territory and laws, and their laws are going to apply. If you cannot go there personally, I would definitely reach out to one to handle that process. And the process would be to change the deed and the title or ownership, however it is in the country which you're speaking of, to your name as a part of the probate process, and to close the estate once and for all, once you've handled, if you're the executor or the closest or the only of kin, any remaining liabilities that she has, because they will come after the real property if there are liabilities to be paid, and they will be looking for that. So again, contact a probate or will or estates attorney in the country or the city of the country where the property is located or where your mother passed away.
Okay, and so talking about real estate, as you know, our guest, her father had several properties. I think it was 7 or 8 to 10. I'm not exactly sure how many. And because the trust was not funded, and there was a bankruptcy, there was a lawsuit that I think ultimately ended up being dropped. She states at the end of her interview that they ended up getting less than they thought that they were going to get as their inheritance, because some things had to be liquefied in order to cover costs. The process of, so we know the process of selling real estate, but what happens once those proceeds fund in? I'm assuming there has to be an account.
Yes.
That is set up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Well, in the process of winding down an estate, there are taxes and fees assessed with your ownership of various different assets, and the tax rates differ from real property to personal property to business, etc. And so there are taxes and fees, and what's left over, the residue of that, is what is distributed to the loved ones of the decedent. So yes, it will easily happen that fees will be associated with the transfer or just winding down, closing probate. And that's why pre-planning is necessary. That's why I encourage folks to, especially if you're a senior, to look at your accounts. And oftentimes, if there's someone you trust, or the executor, or a child, not a child, but a child of yours, to put them on your account such that they are partial owners of the account, which is a strategy that can be used to avoid a lot of the fees and process that will take place when you pass away.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking about earlier. One of the things, when my dad, who had quite a bit of property, started getting additional property, when he refinanced one of his properties to pull equity out to get the next one, he put my name on it. So I'm not on the loan, but I'm on the deed. So that will eliminate a lot of issues when it's time for the property to pass on, because I already own it. And I've owned it for more than, at this point, it's more than 10 years.
That's true. And we all know or should know that the financial obligation for a mortgage that's on a piece of real estate does not go away just because you are on the deed. So don't think that just because a loved one has put you also on the deed as a part of their estate planning, that when they pass away, that loan associated with the real estate goes away as well. It does not. And oftentimes I see people ending up with less than they thought they should get because they're not appreciating the financial obligations and debts of the decedent.
Right. No, the whole purpose of putting you on the deed is so that you don't have to wait for this long legal process of probate in order to start making financial decisions.
Absolutely.
In order to, right, if you decide you want to sell the property immediately, you can. Or if you want to put other tenants in or do something else with the property, you have the authority to do it because you already own it.
Absolutely. And Ramona, that's a good point, because what's also notable to point out is that a power of attorney ceases to exist upon the death of the person. So if you have a power of attorney and the person dies, your power of attorney means nothing anymore.
Wow.
And that's why another step of putting you on the deed to a property is very important as well. Some people think that a power of attorney lasts even past the date, the moment the person dies, and that's when it terminates.
Wow. Wow. And so with the expiration of the power of attorney, it automatically, any authority or any decision making automatically yields to whatever you have set up after your death, whatever is in your will, everything. So one person can be in charge here, and because the will says this, all of that automatically reverts to someone else.
Right. You can go into a bank if you are a named person on the account after your parent has died and withdraw money.
Right.
You cannot go into a bank and you're not on that bank account with a power of attorney and say, by virtue of this power of attorney, I want to withdraw money. That's what we call a crime.
Okay, it's a whole lot of criminals out there. Well, I'm gonna tell you that I have advised my daughter that if I go into the hospital and I'm on my last breath, do not hesitate. Log into my bank account and transfer all the money into the payroll account. Just log in and transfer the money. If they tell you who told you to do it, say, I said it. This is what I want you to do immediately.
Right.
Okay. Right. Because in all honesty, my ultimate desire is that I want my business and the things that I'm doing to keep going. The best way to do that is to keep funding my employees. And because anything else that needs to happen after that may take forever, but at least they'll be paid for maybe the next 2 paychecks.
Yeah. And a power of attorney gives you the legal right to do that. The topic, it's like a mushroom. It grows and grows. Because if we're talking about wills, we got to be talking about estates. If we're talking about wills and being in a hospital, we have to talk about a power of attorney. And if we're talking about decisions made when you're in the hospital and you can't speak for yourself, we're talking about advanced medical
directive
and living will.
Yeah.
All of these are important components of a will or a proper estate planning that every person should have.
Absolutely.
You have it now. It may change over time, but having something in place is better than nothing at all.
Absolutely. And with that, how frequently should you revisit it? Every year? Every 3 years?
I advise every year or some period of time that you're comfortable with. And here's why. You will fall out with your loved ones. Things will change. Family will grow. People will get put into your doghouse and let out of your doghouse. And what you don't want to do is to change your estate planning tools based on your emotions of the moment. So pick a time that works for you. I can't tell you whether that's a year or a week or 5 years, but pick a time for reevaluation of things periodically so that your will and all those estate planning documents still conform to your wishes.
Absolutely. I think I can't keep saying this enough that I believe when someone passes away, it should be a celebration and an opportunity for us to reflect on our relationship with them. We should not be fighting over who gets the fur coat, who gets the car. I had a guest on a few weeks ago, and the day of the funeral, her brother was at Motor Vehicles, transferring the title of the truck into his name. A week later, they found the will, and the truck was supposed to go to the youngest child. So now they're trying to decide, and they're trying to decide, do we even fight over getting the truck back? Or should we stay focused on the house who the stepdaughter took possession of? And it's not even supposed to go to her.
I could tell you story after story similar to that. And you know, look at your position. I don't want anybody to be fighting when I die. And I don't think anybody believes that they're going to be the one fighting while you're still alive.
Right.
But I do believe that is part of the grieving process. And since everyone is different, it's happened in my family, it'll happen in your family. And I have tens of stories about crazy things that have happened in this event.
Absolutely. And give everyone your information again, Mr. Thomas.
Again, it's Derrick Thomas, DerrickThomas, and my email is my first name dot last name at D as in Derrick, T as in Thomas, CORPLAW, Derrick.Thomas at DT Corp Law. If you don't write that down, then just go into the Maryland Bar website and search attorneys and search Derrick Thomas, you'll find.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for being on this week. You were a lifesaver. And you have provided us with so much good information. We do this quite frequently. We may invite you back, depending on the topic, and to discuss what we need our listeners to hear. And just sort of, sometimes somebody needs to say it other than me, so that they encourage them to reach out and to engage the process of just making life be peaceful.
Well, you've been my farmer's agent for a lot of years now, and I'm happy to serve.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye. All right, listeners, coming up next week, I think we're going to have another guest on. Right now, I want to finish. Taylor, can we finish playing the interview? If that's possible. And while she's queuing that up, I want to finish playing this out so we can hear Miss Simmons' story, Taylor, and just hear what she had to say. And I've been getting.
I'm pulling it up.
Okay, thank you. I've been getting these testimonials on because, again, I can sit on here and talk about insurance for an hour, and you guys can all be bored, but you need to hear other people's situations, their circumstance. We overcome the world by our testimony, and hear what other people have gone through and the situations that they've been put in that have allowed them to just, for it not to be easy, to be full of stress and grief and chaos. And it doesn't have to be. It's a simple process, and it is an issue of making it a priority. And if you can do that, then you can position yourself and your family to not be in a chaotic, sort of outrageous, out of control situation because someone has passed. I truly and honestly believe that passing should be a celebration of life, not an arduous outcry of death. And there are ways to do that. Are we ready to go, Taylor?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think we found out when I was in college that my father had policies out on us, and he had transferred the responsibility of paying the premiums for these policies to us, and my brother took it over since he was out of college and working. And he was very, kept telling us and instilling us it's important to have insurance, it's important to have life insurance, to cover these things. So we just assumed, since our policies were still in effect, that his policy was in effect, and we had no idea that he had canceled it.
And how soon did he cancel it prior to his death? Had it been canceled years ago, or had he canceled it?
I think it was years before. It wasn't something recent. It wasn't recent. It was years before. And I don't even know why. So it was a possible.
Right, it's possible because life insurance should metamorphosize as you go through different stages of life, and at some point, your need for a whole lot of amount, because your children are now grown and have their own children, the grand need changes. So he didn't need money set aside to put you guys through college if you had already gone through college. I am surprised that he canceled it. He set up a trust, and then he didn't have a way to fund the trust. Because that's usually what you use life insurance for, to fund the trust, and to make sure that the money's there to cover the cost when you guys fly across the country, or cover the taxes.
I know that
life insurance at some point,
Yeah, I know that the trust he set up was specifically for being able to transfer property without us having to, I know that was part of the reason for the trust, and not having to go through probate. But we ended up having to do it anyway because he was in the middle of bankruptcy.
Right.
So
and the people who know money want their money.
Yes. Yeah.
So where has it resolved at this point?
So everything was resolved. We did have to go through the probate. We did have to pay his creditor. The lawsuit was dropped, and we ended up, getting a significantly less amount for our inheritance than initially expected. But we didn't have a lot of liquid money at that time to pay for a proper service or burial. And then part of what was interesting about his will was that in his will he had indicated that he wanted to be cremated, and he had told me that, and that was one of the only conversations we had about death in general, is when he took me on a trip, and he said when he was younger he wanted to be cremated, but now he wanted to be buried, and he was in the Navy, and so he wanted to be at a national cemetery, and he wanted them to pay for that benefits because he had earned it, and he was, very active in the VA, and he said that this is something that he had earned, and he wanted to take advantage of it, so he wanted to be buried, and that was a point of contention with me and my brother, because the will said one thing, and he had told me another thing, and even when we found the updated will, it was still old, it wasn't like recent. It was just newer than the one that he was carrying around with him. That one still had his wishes to be cremated. So, it was a lot. There was a lot of, and then of course the emotions and the back and forth. So, and my brother is the type of person where, if it's not in the will, he didn't really mean it. So, right. It was one of those things that we did go back and forth for quite a while, and one of the deaconesses had to get involved from my old church, and the family had to get involved, and it was just a back and forth. And I think about, like, had he updated his will just to say that he had that change, we would not have gone through what we went through.
Right. Or even brought everybody together.
Yeah.
To communicate it all in one place, not just one person.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
and he had talked about it with a friend.
I'm happy.
So. But,
did that help in the resolution of it?
It kind of did, because my brother had talked to that friend, and he had reminded him that he had talked about it, and talked about kind of taking advantage of the resources that my father was eligible for based on the fact that he served in the Navy and was a veteran, and all of that. So I think it did help, but I think mainly it was my aunt who kind of resolved everything and kind of, worked things out with me and my brother. But I think the friend did influence my brother.
It's always good to have witnesses.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for telling me your story. I'm going to try to do it justice today.
All right. One of the things she concluded with is that having gone through this experience with her father, it allowed her to have a straightforward and honest conversation with her mother. Sometimes the person who is closer to experiencing their death is more difficult than you who are behind. And let's just be honest, wills, trust, whether it's revocable or irrevocable, they're for the people who are left behind. Funerals are for the people who are left behind, not for the individuals that are gone. So your children need to have the conversation with your parents and help them get to the process where you know what's going on and you know what to do. Because at the end of the day, you will be the one here who has to do it, and they'll be gone to rest with the Lord. It's so important for you to decide now, for you to actually stop and think about it. For Thanksgiving that's coming up, or Christmas, or birthdays, or Juneteenth, when the family gets together for the family reunion, to really sit down and have a conversation with your siblings and your parents and your cousins, whoever is an interested party who you think will try to have something to say at that time, and literally say, what do you want? What do you want us to do? My father was on last week talking about my grandmother who had 13 children. And every year they used to meet for a family reunion. And that's what they did. She sat around and said, this is what I want. They got together and put it on paper and writing. And she set up her will because she had, at the time that she died, a little under 2,000 acres of land. so that no one could sell the land unless they all agreed to sell it. And that literally put it in a position where it would never be sold, which is what she wanted. But she did this because her intentions were thought out and complete, regardless of whether or not she had Alzheimer's. Planning is key to every aspect and part of your life. That Mr. Thomas is right. Emotions get in the way because there are some people who are thinkers and others who are feelers. And emotions always muck things up. And you want to do it in an environment, in a situation where you can be rational and clear, and you can make decisions based on what is the right thing to do versus how you feel. And that's important to do that ahead of time and then revisit it and make sure it's doing what you want it to do as you get closer. And the bottom line is we don't know when that's going to be. So, hey, this is Ramona. I am your insurance guru. We are going to wrap it up this week. Next week, we will be back. I can't remember what the topic is because I'm old and sometimes I forget. But listen to us next week. Call us if you have questions, 443-660-7131. I am Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru, and we are out.